Blood pooled on the trauma bay floor as the chief of surgery screamed, "She's just a nurse! Get her out of my OR!" But as security moved in, the dying FBI agent grabbed the surgeon's scrubs. Coughing blood, he gasped a sentence that froze the room. "She's my commander." The fluorescent lights of St. Jude Medical Center in downtown Chicago flickered, casting long, sterile shadows across Trauma Bay 1. It was 2:14 a.m. on a Friday, and the emergency room smelled heavily of iodine, stale coffee, and the sharp, unmistakable metallic tang of blood. Emma Collins stood by the sink, quietly scrubbing her hands. To the rest of the staff, she was a 12-year veteran trauma nurse, steady, quiet, and unnervingly calm. She didn't gossip at the nurses' station, and she rarely attended staff mixers. What her civilian colleagues didn't know was that her real career wasn't built in Chicago. It was forged in the dust of Kandahar, the darkened streets of Fallujah, and the classified corridors of Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC. Major Emma Collins was the commanding officer of a Tier 1 covert medical extraction unit, currently on a 6-month mandatory civilian rotation to maintain her civilian cover and surgical licenses. "Collins, I need those central line kits prepped 5 minutes ago." The sharp, arrogant voice belonged to Dr. Roland Gallagher, the hospital's chief of surgery. Gallagher was a brilliant surgeon, but his bedside manner was famously toxic. He demanded absolute subservience from his nurses and operated under the rigid belief that an MD was the only credential that mattered in the room. He despised Emma's quiet confidence, often mistaking her unflappable demeanor for insubordination. "Kits are prepped and on the Mayo stand, doctor," Emma replied evenly, not bothering to look up from the scrub sink. "Along with the rapid infuser and extra units of O-negative. We have a code yellow inbound." Before Gallagher could snap back, the double doors of the ambulance bay blew open. The chaos was instantaneous. A swarm of tactical gear, Kevlar, and shouting law enforcement officers flooded the hallway. Chicago police officers and FBI agents in heavily armored vests pushed a blood-soaked gurney through the doors. "Out of the way! Move! Move! Move!" a frantic FBI agent yelled, his face smeared with soot and blood. Emma stepped right into the fray, her eyes scanning the patient. It was a massive chest and abdominal trauma. The patient was a man in his late 30s, wearing a shredded FBI windbreaker. His face was gray, his breathing ragged and shallow. "What do we have?" Emma demanded, her voice cutting through the panic with practiced authority. Special Agent Henry Bradley, the frantic agent, whose jacket read O'Connor, replied. "Operation Ironclad went south. We raided a cartel safe house on the west side. It was an ambush. He took 2 rounds to the chest, 1 to the right upper quadrant. He's losing too much blood. Get him on the table on my count," Emma ordered the paramedics. 1, 2, 3. They transferred the heavy bleeding agent onto the trauma table. The monitors instantly flared to life, screeching an aggressive, high-pitched warning. Bradley's heart rate was at 140, his blood pressure tanking to 70/40. Dr. Gallagher pushed his way through the crowd of federal agents, his face flushed with irritation. "Clear the room! Every badge out of my trauma bay! Right now! Collins, get the shears! Expose the wounds!" Emma had already cut away the shredded vest and shirt. 2 entrance wounds, right mid-clavicular line, 2nd and 4th intercostal space, she reported, her hands moving in a blur as she slapped defibrillator pads onto his chest. No exit wounds. "The abdomen is rigid. He's bleeding out internally. We need to intubate and get a chest tube in, immediately." "I don't need a nurse to diagnose my patient," Gallagher sneered, grabbing a scalpel. "Prep the right side for a thoracostomy." Emma watched Gallagher's hands. They were shaking slightly. Gallagher was used to controlled environments, scheduled bypasses, and clean abdominal surgeries. He wasn't a combat trauma surgeon. He wasn't used to a patient rapidly circling the drain from high-velocity hollow-point rounds. As Gallagher made the incision for the chest tube, a massive geyser of dark arterial blood erupted from the wound, painting the front of Gallagher's surgical gown. Gallagher froze. For 3 agonizing seconds, the chief of surgery stared at the pulsing blood, his mind unable to process the catastrophic anatomical damage. The bullet had deflected off a rib and shredded the intercostal artery, possibly nicking the right pulmonary artery. "He's crashing," the anesthesiologist yelled. "Pressure is 50 over palp. We are losing him. Gallagher panicked. He blindly jammed his fingers into the incision, trying to find the source of the bleeding, but he was only making it worse. Suction. I can't see anything. Give me more light. You're in the wrong plane, Dr. Gallagher, Emma said, her voice dropping an octave, slipping seamlessly into the authoritative tone she used in active war zones. You need to open him up. A chest tube won't stop a pulmonary hemorrhage. We need an emergency thoracotomy. He is not surviving a clamshell opening in the ER. We need him in the OR, Gallagher shouted, his voice cracking. He won't make it to the elevator, Emma countered. She grabbed a heavy Kelly clamp from the tray. Move your hand. Excuse me? Gallagher snapped, his ego flaring despite the dying man on the table. Move your hand, Roland, or he dies right here, Emma said. Without waiting for permission, she physically bumped Gallagher's shoulder out of the way, reached into the bloody cavity with the clamp, and precisely pinched off the severed intercostal artery. The geyser of blood instantly reduced to a manageable seep. The room went dead silent, save for the rhythmic, terrified beeping of the EKG. Gallagher's face turned purple with rage. He looked at Emma, then at the gathered nurses and the 2 FBI agents who had refused to leave the room. He felt humiliated. A nurse had just physically displaced him and corrected his surgical error in front of an audience. Security! Gallagher roared at the top of his lungs. Get hospital security in here right now. Nurse Collins, you are suspended. Step away from the patient, drop the clamp, and get out of my trauma bay before I have you arrested for assault. Emma didn't flinch. Her grip on the clamp remained steady. If I let go, he bleeds out in 60 seconds. I am the chief of surgery, Gallagher screamed. She can't operate. She's just a nurse. Get her out of my OR. 2 hospital security guards tentatively stepped into the room, looking confused. Gallagher pointed a trembling finger at Emma. Remove her. Now. The security guards took a step toward Emma. She braced her stance, calculating whether she would have to physically incapacitate them to keep her hands inside the dying agent's chest. She had a sworn duty to the patient, and she wasn't about to let Gallagher's bruised ego kill a federal agent. But before the guards could close the distance, a weak, trembling hand shot out from the operating table. Fingers, slick with blood, clamped down on Dr. Gallagher's scrub shirt with surprising, desperate strength. Everyone froze. Agent Henry Bradley's eyes fluttered open. His face was the color of ash, and his breathing was a terrifying wet rattle. Despite the massive dose of paralytics and sedatives coursing through his veins, the sheer adrenaline and sheer force of will of a trained operator had forced him back into a sliver of consciousness. Bradley's bloodshot eyes bypassed Gallagher entirely and locked onto Emma. A faint glimmer of recognition and profound relief washed over the dying man's face. He coughed, a spray of pink mist hitting Gallagher's visor. "Don't," Bradley gasped, his voice a gravelly whisper that somehow carried across the silent room. "Touch her." Gallagher looked down in shock. "Agent Bradley, you need to lie still." Bradley yanked Gallagher's scrubs closer, forcing the arrogant surgeon to bend down. "Listen, to her," Bradley wheezed. "She's my commander." Gallagher blinked, his brain failing to compute the words. "What?" "The blood loss is making him delirious. He thinks he's in the military." "I am Major Emma Collins, United States Army, Joint Special Operations Command," Emma stated, her voice slicing through the tension like a scalpel. "Agent Bradley is part of an embedded FBI tactical task force that falls under my direct operational medical purview. He's not delirious, Dr. Gallagher. He knows exactly who I am." The silence in Trauma Bay 1 was deafening. The anesthesiologist stared. The scrub techs stood paralyzed. The 2 security guards slowly backed out of the room, raising their hands in surrender. Agent O'Connor, who had been watching from the corner, suddenly straightened up. "Wait, Major Collins? Valkyrie?" "Confirming," Emma said without missing a beat, using her operational call sign. "Now, O'Connor, secure the perimeter. I need this ER locked down. If Ironclad was an ambush, they aren't done yet." "What is this nonsense?" Gallagher sputtered, trying to reclaim control of his room. "This is a civilian hospital. You do not have authority here. I don't care if you're the Surgeon General, you are a registered nurse in this facility, and I am the Chief of Surgery. Under Directive 51 and the National Security Act, in the event of a catastrophic threat to federal operatives, I am seizing operational control of this medical facility," Emma recited coldly, finally letting go of the clamp and trading it for a rib spreader. Dr. Gallagher, you are no longer the attending on this case. You are my surgical assist. Now scrub back in or get out. Before Gallagher could mount another protest, the lights in the trauma bay violently flickered and died. The heavy, suffocating darkness lasted for 3 seconds before the dim red emergency backup lights kicked on, bathing the bloody room in an eerie crimson glow. The piercing wail of the hospital's primary alarm system began to shriek. Agent O'Connor's radio crackled to life. Explosions of static were followed by terrified screaming from the front lobby. "O'Connor, we have a breach! Heavily armed hostiles, front entrance. They cut the main power grid. They're executing the guards they're looking for, Bradley." O'Connor drew his Glock 19, his eyes wide. "The cartel. They followed the ambulance. They're here to finish him off." Panic erupted in the room. The scrub nurses screamed. Gallagher backed away from the operating table, his hands trembling violently. "They're coming here? We have to evacuate. We have to leave him." "Nobody moves!" Emma roared, projecting the voice that had commanded platoons under heavy mortar fire in the Middle East. The sheer force of her command pinned the panicked staff to the floor. "O'Connor, how many men do you have?" Emma demanded, her hands never stopping their work. She was now rapidly packing the abdominal cavity with gauze to stem the internal bleeding. "Just me and Agent Davis outside the doors. The rest are pinned down in the lobby. Barricade those double doors, use the spare gurneys, the crash carts, whatever you have. Funnel them into a fatal choke point at the end of the hallway," Emma ordered. She looked up at the trembling anesthesiologist. "Keep him under. Push another unit of ONEG." She turned her fierce gaze to Dr. Gallagher, who was backed against the supply cabinets, hyperventilating. "Gallagher," Emma said, her voice dropping the anger, replacing it with a cold, terrifying calm. "I have a bullet resting millimeters from this man's descending aorta. The hospital is under siege. We cannot move him, and we have no primary power. I am going to open his chest, find the bleeder, and pull that round out." You can't," Gallagher stammered. "You don't have the surgical privileges. You'll be sued. You'll go to prison." "If I don't, he dies in 4 minutes. If those sicarios get through that door, we all die," Emma said, picking up a heavy striker saw. "I'm not asking for your permission, Roland. I'm telling you what is about to happen." A heavy, terrifying thud echoed from down the corridor. Gunfire, the sharp, distinctive crack of automatic AK-47s, shook the walls of the hospital. The war had arrived at St. Jude's. Emma Collins locked eyes with the terrified chief of surgery. "Now, put your hands in the patient, doctor. We have work to do." The heavy, rhythmic thud of the striker saw tearing through Special Agent Henry Bradley's sternum was a gruesome counter-melody to the staccato bursts of automatic gunfire echoing down the corridor. Plaster dust drifted like snow from the ceiling tiles of Trauma Bay 1, shaken loose by the concussive force of the cartel's assault on the hospital lobby. Under the harsh, blood-red glow of the emergency backup lights, Major Emma Collins operated with a cold, terrifying efficiency. She had transitioned fully from the quiet, subservient trauma nurse into Valkyrie, the Tier 1 JSOC commander, who had pulled broken operators from the burning wreckage of Blackhawks in hostile territory. "Rib spreaders," Emma demanded, her gloved hand extended. Dr. Roland Gallagher, the once arrogant chief of surgery, stood frozen. His pristine, custom-tailored scrubs were painted in Bradley's blood. His mind, conditioned for highly controlled, sterile environments with classical music playing in the background, was completely short-circuiting. The deafening crack of a shotgun blast from the hallway made him flinch violently. "Roland!" Emma barked, her voice cracking like a whip. "Look at me! Not the door! Look at me!" Gallagher's terrified eyes snapped to hers. "I need the Finocchio retractor." "Now," she commanded, her tone brooking absolutely no dissent. "You are a surgeon. This is an anatomy puzzle. The noise outside does not exist. The only thing that exists is the puzzle in front of you. Hand me the retractor." Trembling, Gallagher grabbed the heavy metal rib spreader from the tray and placed it in her hand. Emma inserted the device into the massive incision across Bradley's chest and cranked it open. The sickening crunch of separating cartilage filled the small space, exposing the dying federal agent's beating heart and the catastrophic ruin of his right lung. "Oh God," whispered Dr. Peter Evans, the anesthesiologist, who was furiously hand-pumping the ventilation bag since the mechanical ventilators had died with the power grid. There's so much blood. Suction, Emma ordered. A scrub tech, tears streaming down her face, fumbled with the battery-powered portable suction unit. It's not clearing fast enough, Major. Use the lap sponges. Pack the upper quadrant. We have a massive pulmonary hemorrhage, Emma said, her fingers delicately but swiftly navigating the slick, pulsing cavern of Bradley's chest. Gallagher, get your hands in here. I need you to clamp the hilum to stop the lung from bleeding out. Do it now. For a fraction of a second, Gallagher hesitated, but the absolute certainty in Emma's eyes anchored him. He stepped up to the table, took a deep breath, and plunged his hands into the bloody cavity. His muscle memory as a cardiothoracic surgeon finally overrode his panic. He found the pulmonary hilum and clamped it. The massive welling of dark blood slowed. Good, Emma said softly. Hold it right there. Outside the heavy double doors, the war was escalating. Agent O'Connor and Agent Davis had flipped a heavy steel medical supply cabinet to reinforce the barricaded gurneys. They're in the north stairwell, Davis screamed over the radio chatter. We've got heavily armed tangos pushing the second floor. Where is SWAT? 5 minutes out, O'Connor yelled back, racking the slide of his M4 carbine. If they breach this hallway, we drop them in the funnel. Nobody gets through those doors. Inside, Emma was using a pair of DeBakey forceps to gently probe the tissue near the spine. I have eyes on the projectile, she announced. Her voice was steady, but a bead of sweat rolled down her forehead. It shattered the fourth rib and deflected downward. It is resting less than 2 millimeters from the descending thoracic aorta. It's pulsing with his heartbeat. If it shifts, it will lacerate the aorta, and he will bleed to death in 15 seconds. You can't pull it without tearing the aortic wall, Gallagher whispered, leaning in, his clinical fascination momentarily overriding his terror. The thermal damage from the bullet has fused it to the adventitia. You pull that out, you rip the artery. I know, Emma said. I need you to prepare a 4-0 proline suture. When I extract the round, the wall is going to breach. You will have exactly 3 seconds to throw a purse string stitch around the rupture and pull it tight before his pressure bottoms out permanently. Gallagher swallowed hard. In the dark, under emergency lights, without a bypass machine? You're the best surgeon in Chicago, Roland, Emma said, never taking her eyes off the bullet. Prove it. Before Gallagher could thread the needle, a deafening explosion rocked the floor. A breaching charge had been detonated at the end of the hallway. The shockwave blew the trauma bay's observation window inward, showering the room with thousands of shards of tempered glass. Dr. Evans screamed as a jagged piece of glass sliced his cheek, but he kept his grip on the ventilation bag. They're coming! O'Connor roared from the hallway, unleashing a deafening volley of suppressing fire. The brass casings clattered loudly against the linoleum floor. Focus! Emma shouted over the gunfire. Suture, ready? Ready? Gallagher said, his jaw clenched, his hands miraculously steady. The crucible of the moment had burned away his arrogance, leaving only the pure, raw skill that had earned him his title. On 3, Emma said, gripping the bullet with the heavy forceps. 1, 2, 3. With a sharp, calculated twist, Emma yanked the deformed hollow point bullet out of the chest cavity. Instantly, a high-pressure jet of bright red, oxygenated blood sprayed from the weakened aortic wall, hitting Emma squarely in the chest. Throw the stitch, she commanded, pressing her thumb directly over the microscopic tear, fighting the massive arterial pressure. Gallagher moved like lightning. As Emma rolled her thumb back just a fraction of a millimeter, Gallagher drove the curved needle into the aortic tissue, swooped it around the rupture, and pulled. Tying down, Gallagher said, his voice breathless. He knotted the suture. Emma removed her thumb. The repair held. The bleeding stopped. Got it, Gallagher exhaled, slumping slightly. Don't relax, Emma snapped. Start closing the pulmonary tear. We aren't done. Suddenly, the gunfire outside abruptly stopped. A chilling, heavy silence fell over the corridor, broken only by the sound of heavy combat boots crunching over broken glass. O'Connor? Emma called out. There was no answer. The rhythmic hiss-click of the manual ventilator bag was the only sound in Trauma Bay 1. Outside the barricaded double doors, the silence was suffocating. Emma exchanged a dark, knowing look with Gallagher. The silence didn't mean the police had arrived. It meant the outer perimeter had failed. "Dr. Evans, keep bagging him," Emma ordered, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. She stepped away from the operating table. Her scrubs were soaked in Bradley's blood, her hands stained crimson up to the elbows. "What are you doing?" Gallagher hissed, his panic returning as Emma walked toward the supply carts. "You can't leave the field." "The surgery is stable. The room is not," Emma replied coldly. She bypassed the surgical trays and grabbed the heavy, red Zoll defibrillator unit. She ripped the two conductive paddles from their holsters and thumbed the charge dial all the way up to 360 joules. The machine emitted a high-pitched, rising whine that cut through the tension in the room. "Get down," Emma commanded the nurses and Gallagher. "Under the tables. Now." They didn't hesitate. Gallagher dropped to his knees, pulling the scrub tech down with him. Evans crouched as low as he could while still squeezing the manual resuscitator for Bradley. A heavy, gloved hand slammed against the frosted glass of the double doors. Through the wire mesh of the window, Emma could see the silhouette of a massive man wearing a tactical vest and a ballistic helmet. He wasn't law enforcement. The barrel of an AR-15 smashed through the remaining glass of the door, and a heavily tattooed arm reached through to unlock the deadbolt. The door kicked open. A mercenary, a ruthless cartel enforcer named Dawson, stepped into the red-lit trauma bay. He swung the barrel of his rifle, sweeping the room. He saw the cowering staff, the dying agent on the table, and finally, the lone nurse standing calmly in the center of the room. "Step away from the table, sweetheart," Dawson growled, his laser sight painting a red dot right in the center of Emma's forehead. "I'm just here to finish the job." Emma didn't raise her hands. She didn't scream. She just looked at him with the cold, dead eyes of a predator assessing its prey. "You're in my operating room," Emma said softly. Dawson scoffed, his finger tightening on the trigger. "And you're about to be a casualty of—" He never finished the sentence. Emma lunged. With explosive speed honed by years of close-quarters combat training, she sidestepped the rifle barrel, closing the distance before Dawson's brain could register the movement. She slammed both charged defibrillator paddles directly into the exposed gap of Dawson's neck, right between his Kevlar collar and his helmet. She pressed the shock buttons. Thump. 360 joules of raw electrical current blasted into Dawson's central nervous system. The mercenary convulsed violently, his eyes rolling back into his head as every muscle in his body seized simultaneously. The assault rifle clattered to the floor. Emma held the paddles against him for a full 2 seconds, ensuring the incapacitation, before letting him drop like a stone. Without missing a beat, Emma kicked the paddles away, dropped to one knee, and scooped up Dawson's dropped Sig Sauer 9mm sidearm from his tactical holster. She racked the slide, fluidly aiming it at the doorway, her stance perfect, her grip unyielding. "Clear the fatal funnel!" she roared, her voice echoing into the hallway. A second mercenary stepped into the doorway, raising his weapon. Emma fired twice. The loud crack of the 9mm rounds was deafening in the enclosed space. Both rounds caught the second man squarely in the chest plate, knocking him backward into the corridor. Before the cartel could regroup and push the room, a cacophony of sirens finally overwhelmed the street outside. Heavy floodlights pierced the darkness of the windows. "Chicago PD! Drop your weapons! Drop them now!" The booming voice of the SWAT commander echoed through the hospital's PA system. The sound of heavy boots, K9 units, and overwhelming police chatter flooded the hallway. The remaining cartel hitmen, realizing they were outgunned and out of time, abandoned the assault and scrambled for the exits, only to be cut down or apprehended by the surging tactical teams. A heavily armored SWAT team leader rounded the corner into Trauma Bay 1, his weapon drawn. He found Dawson unconscious on the floor, smelling faintly of ozone and burnt skin, and Emma Collins standing over him, her weapon lowered in a safe, low-ready position. "Room clear," Emma announced calmly, engaging the safety on the pistol and setting it on the counter. She turned back to the operating table. "Dr. Gallagher, status on the patient?" Gallagher slowly peeked out from under the surgical tray. He looked at the unconscious cartel hitman, then at the gun, and finally up at the blood-soaked nurse who had just defended his trauma bay like a Delta Force operator. He stood up, his hands shaking, and checked the battery-powered monitor. Pressure is 110/70. Heart rate is 92. The aortic repair is holding. The bleeding has stopped. He's stabilizing. Emma let out a long, slow breath. The rigid posture of Major Collins seemed to melt away, leaving only the exhausted frame of a civilian trauma nurse. She walked over to the scrub sink, turned on the tap, and began to wash the blood from her hands. "Good work, Roland," she said quietly over the sound of the running water. "You saved his life." Gallagher walked over to her. He was covered in sweat and gore, his $500 haircut ruined, his ego thoroughly dismantled. He stood beside her at the sink, turning on the water to wash his own hands. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The emergency lights flickered, and suddenly, the main power grid surged back to life. The harsh fluorescent lights blinded them momentarily, and the hospital machines resumed their normal, rhythmic beeping. Gallagher looked at Emma's reflection in the mirror above the sink. "I don't know who you really are, Collins," Gallagher said, his voice completely devoid of its usual arrogant bite. "And I don't know what you do when you aren't changing IV bags in my hospital." He grabbed a paper towel and dried his hands. "But if you ever need an assist on a surgical field," the chief of surgery said, his voice thick with profound, hard-earned respect, "you just say the word, Commander." Emma offered a faint, tired smile. "I'll keep that in mind, Doctor. Now, let's get him up to the ICU. We still have a long shift ahead of us." What a breathtaking finale! Major Collins proved that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear scrubs and carry defibrillators. From life-saving surgery to taking down cartel mercenaries, Emma's undercover skills completely shattered the arrogant doctor's ego. Would you want a badass like Commander Collins as your trauma nurse? Let us know in the comments. If you loved this intense, action-packed medical thriller, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories.
Hi, my name is Tranthan, the owner and manager of Noble Tales. After watching the video, "She can't operate," the chief yelled. Then the wounded FBI agent said, "She's my commander." I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the contrast between appearances and reality. Emma seemed like a quiet nurse doing her job, yet when everything fell apart, her experience, leadership, and calm under pressure became impossible to ignore. One lesson I took from this story is that true capability doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes the people making the biggest difference are the ones who never ask for attention. Which moment changed your view of Emma the most? And what do you think Gallagher learned by the end of the story? If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, feel free to like the video or subscribe to Noble Tales for more.